We are the women of Serve to Perform.
We, as women, are very powerful when we are together.
We are the women of Serve to Perform.
As women, we can do anything. It is the same thing that I teach my daughter.
We are the women of Serve to Perform.
I think women's empowerment is the freedom to just be yourself.
We are the women of Serve to Perform.
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 Welcome back to the Serve to Perform podcast, and welcome back to another episode about women's empowerment. Today we're joined with Miss Mallory McGee. Thank you for joining us, Mal.
Thanks, Lainey. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So like I said, today we're going to talk about women's empowerment and all things women. So Mal, tell us a little bit about maybe one woman in your life who had a really positive influence or impact on who you are today.
I think my biggest role model in the workplace would be my grandmother.
Okay.
My grandmother, Betty McGee. She and my grandfather owned a series of newspapers and constantly had deadlines to meet. And while doing all of that, she raised a family with 3 children and 7 granddaughters, multiple great-grandchildren now. And so she left behind a really cool legacy, and I just saw her work ethic, and I saw how much she put into the business and how it never stops and you're always on the go, but that there's reward and there's value in the end.
Yeah. Well, and that's so awesome. So see, my grandmother was also one of my biggest influences growing up, always, 1000%. She was very much so on the go, very much so how can she serve other people? How can she help her family? How can she help me individually as well as my brother? Always. And so that connection is that's so real for me specifically too, just because I have wanted to model myself after my grandmother as well. And having those influences as young children, you don't think much of it when you're younger, but then when you grow up, you're like, wow. And you realize just how much they did and just how much they influenced you, which is just the coolest part in my opinion. As you watched her, work as hard as she did and raise all of the children and grandchildren that she had a huge hand in raising too. What are some of the biggest lessons that you learned from her?
Definitely a lot of cooking lessons.
Okay. Which are always good lessons.
Cooking to this day. I think to always put family first is the biggest lesson, that no matter what's going on, family is most important.
Yeah.
And that's a big lesson we were all reminded of in 2020. I think another big lesson that she taught me is to be kind.
Yeah.
And she always said, this too shall pass. So when I'm facing some type of issue or situation that has me up at night and makes me anxious or makes me stress or makes me worry or makes me upset, I just remember that this too shall pass and that tomorrow is another day and things, the world goes on. And so that was another thing that came to mind a lot during 2020 and what we're still trying to kind of move forward in with 2021. So
yeah, for sure. That's awesome. See, and that's so special. Just even those small things that you can remember her saying and remember her repeating constantly. It's like, oh yes, I like this too shall pass. I will be able to get through this and be able to handle whatever is coming my way next. And that's just so awesome to be able to have those memories and have such that strong female influence in your life. I mean, I can remember plenty of times with my grandmother where she would say something and she would just say it. She wouldn't think it was a big deal. But me now as a 23-year-old, I'm able to reflect at what I remember as a 5-year-old her saying and being like, wow, that was so impactful. And that's why I want to be who she was. That's why I want to be who she was for me specifically and just the person that she was. And so, piggybacking off of the positive influence that your grandmother was and the positive influence that she, helped build you to be, is there some things that you think you took from her other than the cooking lessons and other than like characteristics that you're like, oh, that was my grandma?
But, well, I got some bad characteristics because she had a mouth like a sailor, and I've been accused of the same. She was a fun person. She never stopped living and always made time to travel and to explore. And so those are things that I hope to build into my life, to make time for the things that are important, the things that create new experiences and keep my world diverse and special and unique, that I can go and see other cultures and other languages and get those experiences as well. I think that's something I learned from her, and I want to incorporate into my life currently and into my future. So
that's awesome. You know, and those lessons that you've learned from her and the things and the characteristics that you've picked up from her, you know, you'll transcend to your children and your children's children, and that'll just continue to be a lifelong thing. And you'll look up one day and be like, wow, I didn't even realize I did that, but I've done that, and that was my grandma, or that was what I wanted to teach them, and I didn't even ever necessarily come out and say that, which is also really special to be able to be that way individually. One thing I will ask, so you're fairly young, right? You're in your premature super career. What are some tips or tricks that you wish you would have knew when you were first getting into the real world?
I think just for me, starting out, I came from a small town. I had a very sheltered upbringing. And so for me, I didn't know what to expect walking into professional life.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who to trust. And I think I made a lot of errors early on in my career, just maybe trusting people that were wolves in sheep's clothing or weren't the right people to follow and to model. And so as any young leader, you're exposed to negative and positive experiences from the leadership that you encounter. And so just remember your values, remember your gut instincts, I think is what I would tell my younger self and the young professionals out there. Trust your gut, trust your instincts, know when something's right, know when something's wrong, and always speak up. If it's something that's wrong and that you don't feel comfortable with, always speak your mind and tell your truth. And I wish I had learned that lesson a lot earlier on in my career.
Yeah, which is such a huge lesson, right? And I mean, even being able to learn it when you did in your career, you're probably like, wow. And just the difference before you really learned that and before that had really set in. And after, you're probably like, yes, I'm a much different person, but I'm a much better person. And I'm able to speak my mind and stand up for what I believe in and stand up for what is right. And that's the biggest part, right? We live in a world that is very diverse and everybody has their own voice. And if you don't use your voice, then you're never going to be heard. So do you have any final words that you want to wrap up our conversation about women's empowerment, or any tips or tricks or advice that you have for other women?
I would just say, I know this is about women's empowerment, but we wouldn't really be where we are if it weren't for some of the really incredible men that we've encountered in our careers.
Agreed.
I've had so many role models in industries that were male dominated that really helped give me a voice and reached out their hand to me to help, pull me up and give me a seat at that table and make sure that people heard my opinion and that there was respect for other females in the industry. And so I think even though it's about women's empowerment, we have to definitely say a special thank you to all of the guys that helped make our careers possible. And we definitely have some of those pioneers within SERVE2PERFORM, and I'm thankful to work within a group that empowers women and makes extra efforts to make sure that we're included and that we're heard. And so thanks, Phyllis.
Yeah. Thank you, Mal, for giving us your insights. Thank you for talking to us a little bit about women's empowerment and all things positive influences. I never knew your grandmother, but I can tell you that I promise you're probably more like her than what you would think. Thank you, Mal, for being the glue that holds Serve to Perform together. And thank you for all that you do.
Thanks, Delaney.
Next time on the Serve to Perform podcast.
In my mind at that time, I prioritized the work and the sacrifice that came. I mean, there's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of sacrifice. There was a lot of time investment in those relationships and in those operations that I intentionally pushed back the family part of me. So for me, like, where was the sacrifice as a woman? Well, it was in not seeing that I could be a mother and be a leader to all of these associates.